"Get that rifle case off my table." Sergeant Marcus Hale didn't look up when he said it. He was studying a map finger tracing the mountain corridor they'd be moving through in 72 hours, and he spoke the words the way a man speaks when he's already decided the conversation is over before it begins. The rifle case stayed on the table. He looked up. Lieutenant Ava Reynolds stood across from him, with both hands at her sides, her expression completely neutral, and she said, "I was told this was the mission briefing room, Sergeant." "It is. Then I'm in the right place. If you're watching this story for the first time, welcome. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." The compound sat at the edge of the Kandahar Plateau, like something the mountain had tried to swallow and given up on. Dust lived in everything there, in the seams of the tents, in the grooves of the floorboards, in the back of every man's throat. The soldiers assigned to Operation Silent Horizon had been living inside that dust for 11 days, and by the time Ava Reynolds walked through the compound gate on the 12th morning, they had already developed the particular attitude of men who believed they had seen everything worth seeing. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. Marcus Hale was 38 years old and had been in uniform since before some of the men under him had learned to drive. He carried his experience the way certain men carry money, not by showing it, but by letting other people feel the weight of it in every room he walked into. He had done 4 combat rotations. He had buried friends. He had made decisions under fire that he still turned over in his mind at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't hold him. And he had learned through the kind of hard schooling that leaves permanent marks that the most dangerous thing on any battlefield was surprise. So when a young woman with a worn rifle case walked into his briefing room and didn't move it when he told her to, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not anger, curiosity. "You're Reynolds," he said. "Yes." "The sniper they sent from Pendleton?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, the way a man looks at something he's trying to classify. She was younger than he expected. Not young in the way that made you think inexperienced young, in the way that made you wonder what it cost her to get into this room. Her eyes were steady. Her posture was straight without being rigid. She wasn't trying to impress him, and she wasn't afraid of him, and both of those things together created a feeling he couldn't immediately name. "How many combat deployments?" he asked. "This is my second." "Second." He said it without emphasis, but the weight was there. "Yes." He nodded slowly, the way men nod when they've already made up their minds. "All right, Reynolds. Briefing's at 1400. Don't be late." She picked up her rifle case and walked out. The moment she cleared the door, the room exhaled. Corporal Danny Rusk, 24 years old, and built like someone had stacked 2 men on top of each other, leaned over from where he'd been pretending to read a supply manifest. "That's the sniper." "That's what they tell me," Hale said. "She looks like she should be in college." "Don't say that to her face." "I'm not stupid." Private First Class Noah Bennett, sitting in the corner with a field manual he'd been using mostly as a prop, said nothing. He was watching the door where Ava had just walked out. He had a habit of noticing things other people dismissed, which was ironic because most people dismissed him too. The briefing at 1400 was attended by 11 soldiers. Ava sat at the end of the table. She didn't announce herself, and she didn't try to take up space. She had a small notebook open in front of her and a pen in her hand, and while Captain Ethan Walker ran through the operational overview, she wrote continuously. Captain Walker was 41 and deliberate. He spoke in the measured cadences of a man who had learned that clarity saves lives, and he laid out Operation Silent Horizon, with the kind of precision that told you he'd been over it many times before he stood in front of anyone else. The mission parameters were straightforward on paper. Move a convoy of 43 personnel soldiers, medical staff, 3 NGO workers, and 2 journalists through the mountain corridor, designated Route Copper, reach the extraction point at Firebase Keller, and do it within a 72-hour window before the weather changed and aerial support became unavailable. The threat assessment identified 3 probable enemy contact zones along the route. Standard blocking and observation positions. Mortar capability at the midpoint ridge. Possible IED activity near the southern approach. Walker finished and asked for questions. Rusk asked about vehicle allocation. Sergeant First Class Thomas Vega asked about the rules of engagement regarding the journalists. A medic named Corporal Diana Osei asked about casualty protocols at the extraction point. Ava raised her hand. Walker nodded at her. The threat assessment mentions 3 probable contact zones, she said. I'm looking at the valley topography from the northern approach, and I'm seeing a 4th. The room shifted, not loudly. Just a small collective adjustment the way people move when they're deciding whether to pay attention or dismiss something. Walker said, "Go ahead. The ridge at kilometer marker 17. It's not listed in the assessment because it's outside the standard observation angle from the southern approach. But if you're looking at it from the north, from the direction an enemy commander would use to study our movement, that ridge gives a clean sight line to the first 2 kilometers of route copper and partial coverage of the staging area." Walker studied her for a moment. Intelligence didn't flag it. Intelligence was looking from the south, Ava said. I'm suggesting we look from the north. Hale said from across the table. You've been here 12 hours. 11, Ava said. I got here at 0300. And in 11 hours you've identified a threat that the intelligence team missed. I'm not saying they missed it. I'm saying it might be worth a second look. The silence in the room had texture. Hale looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite dismissive and wasn't quite open somewhere in that uncomfortable middle ground between the two. Noted, Walker said. We'll factor it in. It was a diplomatic answer, and Ava recognized it as exactly that. She wrote something in her notebook and closed it. After the briefing in the narrow corridor outside the operations tent, Rusk fell into step beside her. He was the kind of man whose size made him assume a certain social authority, the assumption that people made room for him because he was worth making room for. You know what I think? He said. Ava kept walking. No, I think you're smart. I think you read the topography maps and you found something that looked unusual and you decided to bring it up because you wanted people to know you're paying attention. I brought it up because it might be relevant. Sure. He said it the way people say sure when they mean whatever you need to tell yourself. Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just saying this team has been together for 3 months. We know how each other moves. We know how each other thinks. You walking in on day 1 and telling us we missed something doesn't play the way you think it does. Ava stopped walking. She turned to face him, and her voice when she spoke was completely level, without heat, without apology. If there's an enemy position on that ridge and we roll through the corridor without accounting for it, do you want to be right about me, or do you want to come home? Rusk stared at her. I'm not trying to belong to your team, she said. I'm trying to do my job. Those 2 things aren't the same. She walked away. Rusk stood in the corridor for a moment, watching her go, and the expression on his face was the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that a conversation he thought he was winning had already ended. That night, Ava went out. Not with a patrol. Not with permission. She moved to the observation point on the eastern perimeter, set up her scope, and spent 4 hours watching the valley. It was the kind of patience that most people couldn't sustain. Watching the dark. Watching nothing happen, or what looked like nothing. The mind wants to wander. The body wants to shift. The eyes want to find patterns that aren't there just to have something to do. Ava had learned through years of practice and through one specific night 2 years ago that she didn't talk about how to make her mind go quiet and just watch. She saw the light at 0140. It was brief. A flash, maybe 2 seconds from the northeastern face of the ridge at kilometer marker 17. The direction and duration were consistent with a signal lamp being used to communicate over a short distance. Not a reflection, not an ambient source. Deliberate. She wrote down the time, the compass bearing the duration. She waited. At 0223, a vehicle crossed the lower valley road. It was moving without headlights, which wasn't unusual, but it stopped at a point along the road that had no military or civilian infrastructure, held position for approximately 4 minutes, and then continued. She wrote that down too. At 0341, she came back inside. Noah Bennett was on the overnight watch rotation, sitting at the perimeter desk with a thermos of bad coffee and a paperback novel. He wasn't really reading. He looked up when she came through the door. "You were out there," he said. It wasn't a question. "Observation post east." "Alone?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, then back at his novel. "You see anything?" She hesitated. In her experience, sharing what she'd seen before she had enough data to make it coherent was how you lost people's attention before you ever had it. But there was something in Bennett's question, a quality of genuine interest rather than polite conversation, that made her answer. "Signal from the North Ridge. Vehicle movement in the lower valley, with no headlights, no apparent destination." Bennett was quiet for a moment. "You going to report it?" "In the morning. I want one more night's observation first." "Why?" "Because 1 data point is a coincidence, 2 is a pattern, 3 is a problem." Bennett nodded slowly, turned a page in his novel he hadn't read, and said nothing more. But he thought about it for the rest of his watch. That much was clear from the way he stopped pretending to read and just sat there looking at the wall with the thermos cooling in his hand. The second morning brought a small humiliation that Ava hadn't expected, which meant she hadn't prepared for it, which meant it landed harder than it should have. It happened at the equipment check. She was calibrating her rifle, a process she performed with the same methodical care every time in the same order, the same steps, because precision wasn't a mood. It was a practice when Rusk walked over with 2 other soldiers, a man named Garrett, and one everyone called Fish, whose actual name Ava had not yet learned. Rusk picked up her spotting scope from the table beside her. "Mind if I look at this?" She did mind. She minded very specifically the way a craftsman minds someone handling their tools without asking, because the question was rhetorical, and they both knew it. But she said, "Sure," and kept working. Rusk turned it over in his hands, looked through the lens, made a small approving sound. "Good glass," he said. Then he handed it to Garrett, and Garrett handed it to Fish, and Fish set it down on the table, with slightly less care than Ava would have liked. Then Rusk looked at her rifle. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What's the longest shot you've taken in the field?" She knew what this was. The question had the particular shape of a challenge wearing the costume of curiosity. She'd encountered it before the performance of professional interest that was actually an audition, as if her answer to the question would determine whether she was worth taking seriously. 1,400 meters, she said. Garrett whistled, then immediately tried to make it not sound impressed. "What were conditions?" Rusk asked. "Crosswind 12 knots variable. Elevation 3,200 meters. Target was partially obscured." "Hit?" "Yes." Rusk nodded with the expression of a man computing whether to believe something. "I'm not doubting you," he said in the tone of a man who was absolutely doubting her. Ava kept calibrating. "Okay. It's just that's a long shot under those conditions." "It is. How many times have you held that distance with those conditions?" She looked up from her rifle. She looked at him directly, without aggression, without defensiveness, with the particular steadiness of a person who has decided that this conversation is less interesting than the work she's trying to do. "Once," she said. "That time." Rusk opened his mouth. Before he could say anything, she added, "The next longest was 1,200. The one after that was 1,150. Would you like the full list, or are we done?" The silence that followed was the good kind, the kind that meant someone had run out of runway. Fish said quietly to no one in particular, "I think we're done." She brought her notes to Captain Walker that afternoon. He was in his office, a generous name for what was essentially a repurposed storage tent, with a table and 2 chairs working through logistics with Vega, and he looked up when she appeared in the entrance. "Reynolds." "Sir, do you have 5 minutes?" He gestured at the chair across from him. Vega gathered his papers and stepped out without being asked, which told Ava that Walker ran a team that read rooms well. She laid her notebook open on the table and walked him through the observations. The signal light at 0140. The vehicle movement. The compass bearings. The times. She had sketched a rough diagram of the ridge and the valley road, with annotations marking the observed positions. Walker didn't interrupt. He listened the way good commanders listen, not passively, but actively tracking the information against his existing picture of the situation, looking for where the two did and didn't align. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. These observations are from last night. And the night before partially. This is the second data point. You went out alone both nights. Yes, sir. He looked at the diagram. The vehicle movement. You're certain it wasn't a local? The road has no civilian structure at the stopping point. No farm access, no utility infrastructure. The stop was 4 minutes, which is long for a mechanical issue and short for a planned meeting, and they were running dark. Locals run dark. Not at 0223 in that valley. The tribal community in that area observes a curfew after midnight because of past IED incidents. It's in the cultural briefing. Walker looked at her. You read the cultural briefing. I read everything they gave me. He looked at the diagram again. He picked up the notebook and turned it toward himself, studying her annotations. His expression was the expression of a man who had just discovered that a problem he thought was manageable was slightly larger than he thought. If you're right about the ridge, he said carefully, it changes the approach to route copper significantly. I know. We'd need to add a clearing operation before the convoy moves. That adds 4 to 6 hours to the timeline. I know. We'd be cutting the weather window close. I know that too, sir. He set the notebook down. He leaned back. He looked at the ceiling of the tent, which was one of those gestures men make when they're deciding something they don't entirely want to decide. I need more than 2 nights of observation and a signal light, he said finally. Ava had expected this. She had the answer ready. Give me 1 more night. If I see it a 3rd time, same pattern, same bearing, you'll have enough to justify the delay. Walker was quiet for a long moment. All right, he said. 1 more night. But you take Bennett with you. Sir. You go alone again. I have a problem with that. You take Bennett. She held his look for a moment, then nodded. Yes, sir. Bennett took the news, the way he took most things, without visible reaction, which Ava was beginning to understand was not the same as indifference. I was in the motor pool when she found him running a maintenance check on one of the convoy vehicles, and he listened to her explain the arrangement without interrupting. When she finished, he wiped his hands on a rag and said, What time? 2200. I'll be at the East Post. You should know what we're looking for. Tell me, she told him. He listened carefully, asked 2 questions, both precise, both relevant, and then nodded. Okay, he said. She looked at him. That's it. Just okay. What else is there? She didn't have an answer for that, so she left him to his maintenance check. That evening at dinner, Rusk made the comment that became the moment everyone remembered later, when things had changed enough that people felt the need to identify where they'd gone wrong. It was nothing original. That was the thing about it. It was the most ordinary possible dismissal delivered loudly enough that the entire mess tent could hear it, and the words were, Hey Reynolds, make sure you don't shoot any of us when the girl's having a bad night. Yeah. There was laughter. Not from everyone, but from enough. Ava was sitting 6 seats down. She didn't look up. She finished the food on her plate, stood up, deposited her tray, and left. Bennett watched her go. Then he looked at Rusk, and he didn't say anything, but his expression had a quality that Rusk didn't notice, and probably wouldn't have understood if he had. The 3rd night confirmed everything. The signal light appeared at 0132. Same ridge face bearing within 2 degrees of the previous observation. Duration 3 seconds, slightly longer, which Ava noted. At 0156, a second light answered it. From lower ground northeast of the 1st position. 2 flashes, a pause, 3 flashes. You seeing this? She murmured. Bennett had his binoculars up. I'm seeing it. That's a call and response. Yeah. That's 2 positions coordinating. Yeah, he said again, and his voice had changed slightly. The way voices change when something that was theoretical becomes real. At 0244, they heard it. Far enough away that it was more vibration than sound, a low thump from the direction of the southern ridge that lasted approximately 4 seconds and then stopped. Both of them went completely still. "Artillery," Bennett said. "Test firing," Ava said. "They're calibrating." "Calibrating for what?" She didn't answer right away. She was doing the math. The angle of the observed positions, the bearing of the sound, the relationship between kilometer marker 17 and the first 2 kilometers of route copper. "For the convoy route," she said. The silence between them was the specific silence of 2 people processing the same information and arriving at the same conclusion at the same time. "We need to get Walker," Bennett said. "Yes," Ava said. "We do." Walker was awake when they reached him. He had the look of a man who hadn't fully slept in days, not exhausted exactly, but worn at the edges like paper that's been handled too much. He listened to them in the dim light of his office tent, Bennett standing in the entrance, Ava at the table with her notebook open. When she finished, Walker said, "The artillery test." "Yes, sir." "You're certain that's what it was?" "I'm certain it was consistent with ranging fire. Duration direction single pulse. It wasn't incoming, and it wasn't outgoing from any of our positions." Walker looked at Bennett. "You heard it too?" "Yes, sir," Bennett said. Walker was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Ava could hear the wind picking up outside moving through the compound, with that particular sound it made in this region at this altitude. A low, sustained note that felt like the landscape thinking out loud. "If I take this to command and delay the convoy," Walker said, "and I'm wrong, if there's nothing on that ridge, we miss the weather window. We're stuck here another week minimum. 43 people waiting in a location that's already compromised by length of occupation." "I understand that, sir. And if I don't take it to command and you're right." He didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to," Ava said quietly. "Sir, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to verify. Send a drone over the ridge at first light. Passive sweep, no engagement. If there's nothing there, you've lost 2 hours. If there's something there." "I know what I've lost if there's something there," Walker said. He stood up. He walked to the tent entrance and looked out at the dark compound for a moment, and then he turned back. "I'll contact command for the drone authorization," he said. "First light. You two get some sleep." Ava and Bennett walked back through the compound in the dark, not speaking. When they reached the point where their paths diverged, Bennett stopped. "Walker's going to do it," he said. "Yes." "You convinced him." Ava considered this. "The artillery test convinced him. I just gave him enough context to understand what he was hearing." Bennett was quiet for a moment. "Rusk said something tonight, after you left dinner." She looked at him. "He said you were manufacturing a threat because you needed to justify being here." Bennett's voice was neutral, reporting not editorializing. "He said the signal lights were reflections, and the vehicle was a local, and you were building a story out of coincidences because you had something to prove." Ava looked at him steadily. "What do you think?" "I think I heard artillery calibration at 0244, Bennett said. "And I think I don't care why you're here. I care that you are." She held his gaze for a moment. "Get some sleep, Bennett," she said. She walked away, and behind her in the dark, the wind moved through the compound again, and somewhere out past the perimeter wire. 2 enemy positions sat on a mountain ridge that the intelligence assessment had missed. Coordinates, its locked weapons calibrated, waiting for the convoy to begin its move through route copper. They were patient. They had been planning this for a long time. And now, for the first time since she'd arrived, someone in the compound was finally paying the same kind of attention. The question, the one that would keep Ava awake until first light. Not from worry, but from the particular alertness of a person who knows the next move is someone else's to make, was whether attention alone would be enough to change what was already in motion. The drone came back with nothing. That was what the report said. Passive sweep, Northern Ridge kilometer marker 17. No heat signatures. No personnel. No equipment. Nothing. Walker read it twice. Then he set it down on the table and looked at Ava with an expression she recognized. Not satisfaction, not relief, but the particular look of a man who has spent political capital on a bet that didn't pay and is now calculating what it cost him. The sweep was clean, he said. Yes, sir. No signatures, no positions, nothing consistent with what you described. I understand. Reynolds. He waited until she looked at him directly. I went to command at 0400 on the basis of your assessment. Colonel Briggs authorized the drone. It came back empty. I understand that, sir. Do you? I wasn't being cruel. He was being precise. Because what I need you to understand is that I have 43 people depending on this operation running on schedule, and I have a weather window that closes in 68 hours, and I just spent 2 of those hours running a sweep on a ridge that showed me nothing. Ava sat with that for a moment. She was aware of the weight of it, not just the operational cost, but the personal one. The thing she'd built over 3 nights of patient observation. The case she'd constructed data point by data point had just been measured against a drone image and found wanting. She said, "Sir, passive thermal at altitude in pre-dawn conditions has a 12 to 15% degradation factor when targets are using suppression technique. Cold packs, reflective ground cover thermal blankets. A disciplined unit can mask from passive sweep for up to 20 minutes. Walker looked at her. I'm not saying the sweep was wrong, she said. I'm saying it may not have captured what's there. The silence in the tent was long and specific. You're telling me, Walker said slowly, that your evidence for an enemy position on that ridge is the absence of evidence from the sweep. No, sir. My evidence is 3 nights of direct observation. The sweep is what I can't explain. Can't explain or won't. She met his eyes. I trust what I saw. Walker stood up and walked to the entrance of the tent. He stood there with his back to her looking at the compound, and she could see the calculation happening, the weight of the operation against the weight of her certainty, and the uncomfortable truth that he couldn't know which one mattered more. The convoy moves in 48 hours, he said without turning around. Unless something changes, we go as planned. He paused. But I'm moving your position. You'll run overwatch from the northern approach instead of the standard southern elevation. You'll have eyes on kilometer marker 17 from first light until the convoy clears the corridor. Ava stood up. Yes, sir. If you see anything, you call it in immediately. Understood. She picked up her notebook and walked out, in the corridor. She stood for a moment in the early morning air and felt the particular sensation of a fight that wasn't over but had moved to a different ground. She hadn't convinced him to delay. She had convinced him to watch. That was something. It wasn't enough, but it was something. What she didn't know yet, what she had no way of knowing, was that the drone sweep had been seen, not by them, by the enemy, and being seen had changed their timeline. Word. Spread the way. Word always spreads in a small compound, not through announcement, but through atmosphere. The invisible communication of people who live in close quarters and read each other the way weather readers read clouds. By breakfast, everyone knew the drone had come back empty. By mid-morning, everyone knew whose idea the drone had been. Rusk found her at the equipment bench. I didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there with his coffee mug and his particular quality of physical presence that he used like a blunt instrument in conversations he wanted to control. Heard the sweep was clean, he said. Ava was running a bore brush through the barrel of her rifle. She didn't stop. Yes. So there's nothing on the ridge. That's what the sweep showed. Which means you sent Walker to command at 4 in the morning over a reflection and a truck. She finished the bore sweep, held the barrel up to check it, set it down. Rusk, I don't have anything to say to you that I haven't already said. I'm not trying to start something. Then don't. He pulled up a crate and sat down across from her, which was the move of a man who had decided to try a different approach after the first one didn't work. He set his coffee down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and his voice dropped into a register she hadn't heard from him before, quieter, less performative. Look, he said, I'm going to be straight with you. I've been in this unit for 3 years. Walker trusts my read on things. And right now my read on you is that you came in here with something to prove, and it's affecting your judgment. Ava looked at him. And your read on me is based on what exactly? 12 hours of observation. He blinked. Because I've been here 4 days, she said. You've been watching me for 4 days, and you've decided you know what's driving me. I've been watching that ridge for 3 nights, and you've decided I don't know what I saw." She picked up her rifle and began reassembling it. "I'm not the one with the evidence problem." Rusk was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if you're wrong? What if I'm right?" The question sat between them like something with mass. He stood up, took his coffee, and left without answering. But he didn't laugh. That was something Ava noted. The first time he'd walked away from her without laughing. It was Garrett who started the nickname. She heard it for the first time that afternoon, walking past a group of soldiers near the vehicle bay. Not talking quietly enough for the conversation to be private, though they probably thought they were. "The ghost hunter," Garrett was saying. "Spending 3 nights looking at ghosts, gets a drone sent up, finds nothing, and now she's telling Walker the drone was wrong." Laughter. 4 or 5 men. "She's going to be real popular when we're stuck here an extra week," someone said. "She's going to be real popular when Walker starts asking whose idea it was to." They stopped when they saw her. She walked past them without changing her pace. She didn't look at them. She didn't change her expression. Inside the nickname, registered. The way these things register, not as pain exactly, but as data. The way the unit was framing her. The story they were building. Ghost hunter. Someone who saw things that weren't there. Someone who cost them a drone sweep and 2 hours of timeline, and who was now going to cost them further because Walker was keeping her on overwatch position instead of integrating her into the convoy defense properly. She understood the story. She just didn't believe it. And there was a distinction between those two things that she was going to need in the next 48 hours to maintain. Noah Bennett found her at the north perimeter at 1600, sitting with her back against the wall and her notebook open in her lap, working through the observations again. He came and sat beside her without being invited, which by now she'd stopped finding surprising. "I talked to Vega," he said. She looked up. "About the drone sweep." Bennett was careful with his words, the way people are careful with words when they've thought about them first. "Vega was on the analysis team when we used passive sweep in the Kunar operation. He said something I think you should know." "Tell me." "He said there was a period 3 months in Kunar where they had a consistent 0 return on passive sweeps in a particular valley. For 8 weeks, 0 signatures. Everyone assumed the valley was clear. It wasn't. The unit operating in that area had access to a specific type of thermal suppression material that was originally designed for industrial use. They'd adapted it." Ava was very still. "Vega said he never found out where they got it, but it was good enough to fool the sweep. For 8 weeks. Bennett paused. "He told me because I asked him whether the drone result yesterday was definitive. He said, in most cases, yes. In some cases, no. And I asked him what the difference was, and he told me about Kunar." Ava looked down at her notebook. She was already writing. "You need to tell Walker this," she said. "I know, but Vega won't go to Walker himself. He says it's speculative. He says he'd need more to bring it up officially." "More meaning what?" "Meaning something other than one sniper's 3-night observation and a story about Kunar." Ava looked at the wall. She understood what Bennett was doing, not just delivering information, but placing it in her hands because they both understood she was the one who would have to carry it. It wasn't unfair. It was just how things were. "What made you ask Vega?" she said. Bennett was quiet for a moment. "Because you're not the kind of person who sees things that aren't there," he said. "And I've met the other kind." She looked at him. He shrugged as if this were obvious. "Some people look for problems because they want to be important. You look for problems like they're already happening, and you're just trying to catch up." She thought about that for a long time after he left. That night, she went back to the observation post. Walker hadn't told her not to. He'd moved her to Northern Overwatch starting the following morning, which meant technically she had one more night in the East Post. She used it. The signal came at 0118. Earlier than the previous nights by 14 minutes, which she immediately noted because pattern deviation meant something. Adaptation. They'd seen the drone, they'd adjusted, but they hadn't stopped. The light appeared twice at the ridge, not once. Not the three-flash sequence from before, but twice a pause. Then twice again. Different code. But the bearing was identical. Within 1 degree of every previous observation. She watched for 2 more hours. At 0302, she heard something she hadn't heard before, a low mechanical sound from the direction of the northeast valley, lasting approximately 90 seconds and then stopping cleanly. Not a vehicle. Something larger. Something that didn't belong to any known civilian or coalition presence in the area. She came inside at 0415. She sat at the perimeter desk and looked at what she had. 4 nights of observation. Signal communications from the ridge confirmed by Bennett as a witness on night 3. Vehicle movement. Artillery calibration. And now tonight, a changed signal pattern that indicated the enemy had adapted their communication schedule after the drone sweep, combined with an unidentified mechanical sound from the northeast valley. They weren't leaving. They were moving closer. She wrote for 45 minutes. Then she went to Walker's tent. I was awake. She'd stopped being surprised by this. She put the notebook on his table and stood back while he read it. He read it slowly, the way he read things that mattered, going back twice on the section about the signal pattern change. When he finished, he said, "The mechanical sound." "Yes, sir." "You're thinking artillery piece or crew-served weapon. The duration and frequency are consistent with a crew-served weapon being positioned, not a mortar, something larger." Walker looked at the notebook, then he looked at her. "Reynolds, I need you to understand something. Command is not going to delay this convoy a second time on your say-so. The political cost of the first delay already came back to me this morning. Briggs is watching this operation." "I understand." "I can't give you another drone sweep." "I'm not asking for one." He waited. "I'm asking for a change to the Overwatch arrangement," she said. "Put me on the ridge at kilometer 17. Not the northern approach, not the standard Overwatch directly on the ridge forward of the convoy route before the convoy moves." Walker stared at her. "You're asking me to put you forward of the main element, alone, on a ridge that may have an enemy position?" "Yes, sir." "That's—" He stopped himself before he said the word that was forming. "That's a significant ask. If I'm wrong, I spend 6 hours on a cold ridge and come back embarrassed. If I'm right, I have eyes on their position before they have eyes on the convoy. If you're right, and they see you first, then at least we know for certain the position is there." The silence in the tent was absolute. Walker looked at the notebook again. He looked at the diagram she'd drawn: the ridge, the convoy route, the angles of observation, the positions of the observed signals. He was a man who understood geometry, and he was reading the picture she'd built over 4 nights and trying to determine whether it was a real picture or a projection. "You take Bennett," he said at last. "Sir, non-negotiable, you take Bennett, and you have a radio and you check in every 30 minutes from the moment you leave this compound. If I don't hear from you on any check-in, I'm pulling the convoy and sending a QRF to your position." He looked at her. "Do you understand what I'm offering you?" She understood completely. He was giving her the chance. He was also telling her exactly what it would cost everyone if she was wrong. "Yes, sir," she said. He nodded. "Go get some sleep. You move in 4 hours." She went to find Bennett at 0500. He was already awake. She didn't know if he'd slept. "Walker approved the forward position," she said. "I know. He told me 20 minutes ago." She looked at him. "He called you before he cleared it with me. He called both of us. He wanted to make sure I understood the situation before you asked me." She processed this. "And do you understand the situation? You think there's a crew-served weapon being positioned on that ridge?" "Yes. And you want to get eyes on it before the convoy moves through?" "Yes. And if they see us first, we call it in and we move." Bennett looked at her steadily. "You make it sound very simple." "It is simple. It's the outcome that might be complicated." He almost smiled. "Okay," he said. "Same answer as always." She started to walk. "Reynolds." She stopped. "For what it's worth," he said. "I think you're right. About all of it." She didn't answer for a moment. Then, Don't tell me that before we move out. Tell me when we come back. Why? Because right now, I need to stay uncertain. Certainty makes you slow. She walked away, and Bennett stood for a moment looking after her with the expression of a man who has just understood something important that he doesn't quite have the language for yet. The pre-dawn hour before they left was the one that broke the surface. She was at the equipment bay, final check on her rifle when Rusk appeared. Not with Garrett, not with Fish. Alone, which meant this wasn't a performance, there was no audience he was playing to. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her gear spread on the table. Walker told me about the forward position, he said. Ava kept working. He didn't tell me why. I figured it out. Good for you. Rusk was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. Is there anything you need? She stopped. She turned to look at him. He wasn't being sarcastic. His body language was different, less territorial, less performed. He looked like a man who'd been awake for a while and was tired in a way that made pretense expensive. No, she said. Because if there's something, I have what I need. He nodded. He was about to leave. Then he stopped, and the words came out of him like something he'd been holding at a distance and had finally gotten too heavy. I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen people come in with credentials and wash out. I've seen people come in with nothing and be the best operator in the room. I thought I could tell the difference. He paused. I'm not sure anymore. Ava looked at him. That's not an apology, he said quickly. I'm not there yet. I know. But I'm also not going to keep... He stopped, started again. Just come back, he said. All right, whatever you find up there, come back. He left before she could respond. She stood at the equipment table for a moment longer, with the quiet weight of that exchange settling into the space where she'd been carrying the other exchanges, the laughter, the nickname, the coffee cup held like a weapon. This one felt different, not comfortable, not resolved, but different. She finished packing her kit and went to find Bennett. They moved out at 05:30 before the light broke fully. The compound sounds fell away behind them as they cleared the perimeter, and what replaced it was the particular quality of outdoor silence at altitude, not empty, but layered full of wind and rock and the small sounds that only resolve into their sources when you slow down enough to listen. They moved without speaking. Bennett had good field instincts, which Ava had suspected from watching how he moved in the compound, and now confirmed. He read terrain, maintained spacing, adjusted his pace to the ground without being told. He didn't try to lead, and he didn't lag. He moved with her, which was rarer than it sounded. An hour out, they stopped for a check-in. Overwatch Alpha, this is Convoy Command. Walker's voice on the radio, barely above static. Convoy Command, Overwatch Alpha. We're on approach to the northern ridge. No contact. Copy that. Weather window is holding. Command wants the convoy en route Copper by 1100. Understood. Over. She clipped the radio back to her vest. 1100. That was 4 hours. 4 hours to reach the ridge, establish their position, assess what was there, and report back before the convoy began moving. It was enough time. Barely. They kept moving. At 0710, Bennett stopped. He put his hand out flat, and she stopped with him. They held position for 30 seconds, breathing through their mouths, listening to everything the silence was saying. Ava heard it 2 seconds after he did. Not a sound. The absence of one. The birds that had been active in the scrub to their left had gone completely quiet. She moved her lips without sound down. They went flat. 40 seconds. 60. 90. 30 meters uphill, a figure moved. Not running. Not patrolling in any formal sense. Walking a short pass across a gap in the rocks visible for no more than 4 seconds, but long enough. Long enough to see the uniform. Long enough to see the weapon slung across the back. Long enough to know with absolute and final certainty that she had been right. She looked at Bennett. He was already looking at her. The ridge that the drone had found empty was occupied. Had been occupied all along. And they had walked to within 30 meters of it without being seen, which meant the drone sweep hadn't been a failure. It had been a deception. She keyed the radio low mouth against the handset. Convoy Command Overwatch Alpha, we have a visual. A pause. Then Walker, his voice carefully controlled, confirm. Enemy personnel, Northern Ridge Kilometer Marker 17. At least one figure confirmed weapons visible. Requesting you hold convoy departure. Repeat hold convoy departure. The pause this time was longer. In that pause, Ava lay flat against the cold ground with Bennett 12 feet to her left and an enemy position 30 meters above her, and she thought about the 43 people in the compound who were going to wake up in the next hour and begin preparing to move through a corridor that had a weapon trained on it. She thought about Captain Walker standing in his tent with a radio in his hand, and a decision that was bigger than she'd given him credit for. She thought about everything she'd written in her notebook over 4 nights, the data points that everyone had been willing to dismiss, and the knowledge no longer a theory, now a fact that she had been right. Walker's voice came back. Convoy departure is on hold. I'm notifying command. What is your status? We're concealed and stationary. No contact. Can you maintain position? She looked at the gap in the rocks where the figure had crossed. Her mind was already working through the geometry, the position, the sight lines, what was likely on the other side of that ridge face. We can maintain, she said. Hold position. QRF is being assembled. ETA to your location 40 minutes. Copy that. She clipped the radio and looked at Bennett. His face was the face of someone who has just understood completely, and without remainder, that the situation is exactly as serious as one person said it was, and nobody else wanted to believe. 40 minutes, he said quietly. Yes. We stay flat, and we stay quiet. Yes. He looked at the rocks above them. You knew, he said, not accusatory, not even particularly surprised, just acknowledging. I knew there was something here, she said. I didn't know it would be this close. That was true. 30 meters. If they'd moved 2 minutes faster if Bennett hadn't stopped, if the birds hadn't gone quiet at exactly the right moment, the distance between the outcome they were in and a completely different one was 30 meters and 2 minutes of time. She pressed herself against the ground and watched the gap in the rocks. Above them, the enemy position held still. Below them in the compound, 43 people were waiting for an order that had just been changed by a sniper nobody wanted on this mission. And somewhere in the space between those two facts, a story was in the process of becoming something that everyone in that compound would spend the rest of their lives unable to forget. 40 minutes felt like 40 hours. Ava lay flat against the ground with her cheek against the stock of her rifle and her breathing measured and slow. The way she'd trained herself to breathe in positions where sound was the difference between alive and not. Bennett was 12 feet to her left, motionless, and the only way she knew he was still there was the faint shift of his weight every few minutes. Small adjustments, deliberate, the movement of a man who understood that stillness was not the same as rigidity. Above them, the position was active. Not loudly. That was the thing that told her the most, not what they were doing, but how quietly they were doing it. A disciplined unit that had been in position for days, possibly longer. Moving only when necessary. Communicating in short sequences. Conserving energy for the moment they'd been positioning for. The convoy moment. At minute 11, a second figure crossed the gap in the rocks. This one moved differently, more deliberate, carrying something in both hands that Ava couldn't fully resolve at this angle, but that had the silhouette of a communications pack. She pressed her lips together and kept watching. At minute 19 she heard voices. Not words, the distance and the wind stripped the language out of it, left only the cadence. 2 voices. One asking, one answering. Back and forth, 3 exchanges, and then silence. She filed it alongside everything else she'd filed over 4 nights, the accumulating evidence of a plan that had been in motion long before any of them knew to look for it. At minute 23 her radio crackled. She pressed it tight to her ear to kill the volume before it could carry. Walker's voice barely above breath. Overwatch Alpha QRF is 7 minutes out. Hold your position. Do not engage. She clicked twice, the acknowledgement that used no sound. Bennett caught the signal. She saw him adjust his grip on his weapon and understood he'd heard it too through the earpiece she knew he was wearing. 7 minutes. She counted them. The QRF came in from the southern approach, which was the right call. It kept them out of Ava and Bennett's line of sight and gave the enemy position no angle to observe their arrival. She heard them long before she saw them, the careful sound of 8 men moving through terrain they'd been briefed on by a man who'd gotten his information from her notebook. Sergeant First Class Vega was leading the element. He found her position without needing direction, which told her Walker had given him the exact coordinates. He came down beside her without a word, looked up at the rocks, and waited. She put her mouth close to his ear. 2 confirmed, possibly more. Communications equipment. Position is on the reverse slope. They have full sight line to the first 2 kilometers of route copper. Vega listened without expression. Then, crew served. I heard a crew-served weapon being moved into position last night. I don't have eyes on it directly. Location estimate. Based on the angles 10 to 15 meters behind that rock face. Elevated approximately 4 meters above our current position. Vega studied the terrain for a moment. She watched him do it the way he absorbed information and converted it into tactical geometry. He was good at it. The kind of good that came from repetition and from having been wrong before, at enough cost that right became the only acceptable outcome. We go around the north face, he said quietly. Flanking element takes the east. You and Bennett hold this position. If anything comes down at us, I'll see it before it reaches you, she said. He looked at her. For a moment, a single unguarded moment, his expression shifted into something that wasn't tactical assessment. It was something closer to the look of a man recalibrating. Then it was gone, and he was back to the map in his head. Stay flat, he said. Do not fire unless you have a clear threat to this element or to yourself. Understood. He moved. The 8 men dissolved into their approach with the particular efficiency of people who have practiced this specific sequence of movements enough that it lives in the body rather than the mind. Ava tracked them as long as she could, and then they were gone, and she was back to the rocks and the gap and the cold of the ground beneath her. Bennett said without moving, barely above a whisper, "How long?" "If the position is where I think it is, 6 minutes, maybe 8. And if it's not where you think..." She didn't answer, because the answer was that if she was wrong about the position, the flanking element was going to walk into a line of fire with nowhere to go, and that was not a thought she was willing to complete. She focused on the gap in the rocks, on the breathing, on the space between what had happened and what was about to. 4 minutes in, she heard the first shout from above. It was in a language she didn't speak, but she didn't need the words. The quality of the shout surprise cut through with something harder told her everything. Contact. The flanking element had found the position. 2 seconds later, the gap in the rocks above her filled with a running figure. I wasn't looking down. He was looking back toward the sound of the shout, and he was moving fast in the wrong direction toward the edge, toward the slope directly toward where Ava and Bennett were positioned. She had approximately 4 seconds. She made the decision in the first one. Came up to a knee in the second. Had the sight picture in the third. The figure stopped when he saw her. 15 meters. His weapon was in his hands but not raised. She said in the clearest voice she had, "Down. On the ground. Now." He didn't speak English, but the muzzle of her rifle and the tone of her voice needed no translation. He went down. Bennett was on him in 3 seconds with zip ties and a knee in the small of his back, and Ava was back to scanning the ridgeline before the man had finished hitting the ground. From above, 2 shots, a pause, 2 more. Not chaotic, controlled. Vega's element was working a contained position. The sounds were moving, which meant pursuit or clearing, and then they stopped, which meant it was over. Her radio crackled. Vega's voice. Position secure. 3 personnel detained. Crew-served weapon confirmed, Soviet-era heavy machine gun positioned for direct fire on route copper. A pause. Reynolds, you were right. She lowered her rifle 2 inches. Bennett looked at her from where he was kneeling on their prisoner's back. You were right, he said quietly, like he was saying it to himself as much as to her. Like the words had a weight he was still adjusting to. She keyed the radio. Convoy command, this is Overwatch Alpha. Position is secure. 3 detained. Crew-served weapon confirmed on the ridge. Route copper is compromised at kilometer marker 17. She paused. Convoy should not move until the full ridge is swept. Walker's voice came back immediately. Copy that, Overwatch Alpha. Convoy is holding. Good work. She clipped the radio. The morning was beginning to come up around them. The kind of slow light that moves across high terrain in stages, filling the valleys before it touches the peaks. She was aware of it the way she was aware of everything in these moments, not with appreciation, but with the particular clarity of a person whose nervous system has been running at maximum resolution for the last 40 minutes and is only now beginning to understand it might be allowed to ease. She looked at the rock face above her. She thought about the convoy. 43 people who had been 40 minutes away from moving through a corridor with a heavy machine gun sighted on the first 2 kilometers of their route. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, and deeply specifically relieved, not for herself, but for the people she'd never met who were still in the compound, drinking bad coffee, waiting for the order to move. With no idea how close the morning had come to being a different kind of story. They came back into the compound at 0940. The QRF was behind them with the 3 detained personnel, and word had preceded them. The way word always does in small closed spaces, not in full, but in outline, the shape of what had happened, moving through the compound ahead of the details. The first person she saw was Rusk, who was standing at the compound entrance, which was either coincidence or intention, and she couldn't tell which. He looked at her when she walked through, at her face, at her gear, at whatever was in her expression that she wasn't monitoring closely enough to control, and he didn't say anything. Then he stepped to the side and held the gate. It was the smallest possible gesture. It meant almost nothing. It meant something. She walked through without stopping. Walker met her at the operations tent. He was not alone. Colonel Briggs was on the radio from command, and there was an intelligence officer Ava hadn't seen before, standing at the map table, looking at the ridge diagram that had been reconstructed from her notebook. Walker looked at her when she came in and said simply, "Good work." "Thank you, sir." The intelligence officer, she didn't catch his name. "Major." Something turned from the map and looked at her with the expression of a man who had just been handed information that rearranged several things he thought he knew. "You've been observing this position for 4 nights." "Yes." "And you reported it after the first night." "After the second. I wanted a confirmed pattern before I brought it up." "And the drone sweep came back negative." "Yes." He exchanged a look with Walker that had a long conversation compressed into it. "The suppression material they used," he said. "We've seen it before. There's only a handful of units in this theater with access to it." Ava waited. "That's not a coincidence," he said. "The unit on that ridge was specifically equipped to defeat our surveillance technology, which means they had advance information about our drone protocols." The room went quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when a sentence lands that changes the shape of everything around it. Walker said carefully, "What are you saying, Major?" "I'm saying that someone told them what to hide from." He looked at Ava. "If your visual observation hadn't confirmed the position, they would have moved that convoy through a kill zone this morning, and nobody would have been able to explain afterward why the drone sweep missed it." She processed this. She was very good at processing things without showing the process, but this one took a moment. Because what he was describing wasn't just an enemy position. It was an enemy position that had been protected deliberately, specifically, by someone who knew how they would look for it. "You're looking for a leak," she said. "We're looking at several possibilities," he said, which was the diplomatic version of yes. She looked at Walker. He was looking at the map. His jaw was set in the way of a man who has received information he's going to need some time alone with before he knows how to carry it. "The convoy," she said. Walker looked up. "When does it move?" 6 hours. We're running a full ridge sweep first. Every position above route copper cleared by foot. And the original threat assessment, the 3 contact zones they identified. We're re-evaluating, sir." She made sure he was looking at her fully before she continued. "If they had information about our drone protocols, they may have information about our convoy composition, the medical personnel, the journalists. If this was a targeted operation. I'm aware, Walker said quietly. The journalists were added to the manifest 48 hours ago. That's a short window. If someone passed that information, Reynolds. His voice wasn't cutting her off. It was placing a boundary around something he wasn't ready to say out loud in front of the major. I'm aware of what this implies. Let me do my job. She held his look. Then she nodded and stepped back. The major was watching her with an expression that was half professional assessment and half something else she couldn't classify. He said to no one in particular, "The observation work you did over 4 nights, that's the kind of patience that's hard to teach." She didn't respond to it. Compliments in moments like this felt like weather real, but not the point. She left the tent. Outside, she found Bennett waiting. He'd been debriefed already, she could tell by the way he was standing, the particular looseness of a person who has just spent 30 minutes answering questions and is now trying to re-inhabit their own body. "The major thinks there's a leak," he said. "You heard?" Vega heard. "He told me before he went in." She looked at him. "How are you doing?" He considered the question like it was an unusual one, which she supposed it was in these circumstances. "I'm thinking about the 43 people on the convoy," he said. "Yeah. And I'm thinking about the person in this compound who may have told the enemy which ridge to put that gun on." She'd been thinking about it too. Had been thinking about it since the major's face in the operations tent. The careful way he'd framed advance information about our drone protocols, a sentence built to carry weight without making an accusation. "The convoy manifest," she said. "Who had access to it after the journalists were added?" Bennett looked at her. "Reynolds. I'm not making an accusation, I'm asking a question. That question is above both our pay grades." "I know." She looked at the compound. At the personnel moving through it, beginning the preparations for a convoy that was 6 hours away from rolling out a gate. But someone in this compound is the reason that drone came back empty. Someone made sure the ridge would look clean. And when the convoy moved, she stopped. Because something had just shifted in the back of her mind. A detail she'd been carrying without knowing what to do with it suddenly finding its place. She had logged the vehicle movement on the first night of observation. A vehicle on the lower valley road running without headlights, stopping at a point with no civilian infrastructure. 4 minutes. Then continuing. She had assumed it was supply movement for the enemy position. Material, personnel, communications equipment. But the road that vehicle had been on, she traced it in her mind. Worked the geography that road connected the lower valley to the compound's fuel supply access point. Not the main gate. The secondary access used for overnight logistics runs. The vehicle hadn't been going to the ridge. It had been coming from the compound. The realization moved through her like cold water. She turned to Bennett. "I need to see the overnight logistics logs from the past 5 days." He stared at her. "Why?" She told him what she'd just worked out. The vehicle, the road, the access point. She watched his face as the geometry of it became clear to him. "That's..." He stopped. "If you're right about the road, I need the logs. That's not something you can just walk in and request." "I know. Walker would need to..." "I know Bennett." I was quiet for a moment, working through it. She could see him doing it, the weighing the calculation, the specific discomfort of a person who has decided to trust someone and is now being asked to carry that trust further than they planned. "I'll talk to Vega," he said finally. "He runs the logistics reviews. If there's an anomaly in the logs, he'd be the one who'd know." "Don't tell him why yet." "Why not?" "Because I don't know who knows what yet. And until I do, I'd rather keep the circle small." Bennett looked at her for a long moment. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what?" "Seeing something nobody else is looking for." She shook her head. "I'm following a line. I don't know where it ends yet." "But you're following it." "Yes." He nodded once with the particular nod of a man who has made a decision that he's going to be responsible for. "Give me an hour," he said. "Chatting." He came back in 50 minutes. His face told her before his words did. Not confirmation, something more complicated than that. The face of a man who has opened a door expecting to find what was described to him and found something worse. The logistics logs, he said, quiet close. There's a run 3 nights ago. Fuel transfer authorized standard entry. The vehicle is logged as returning to the compound at 0215. 0215, she repeated. I observed the vehicle on the Valley Road at 0223. That's 8 minutes. 8 minutes between the log saying the vehicle was back in the compound and me watching it on the road below the ridge. Bennett breathed out through his nose, slow and controlled, the exhale of a man keeping something level that wants to tip. 8 minutes isn't impossible. Maybe the log. Who authorized the run? He looked at her. The name on the authorization, Bennett. A pause. It's not a name you're going to like. She waited. He said the name, and the ground moved under her in a way that had nothing to do with the mountain they were standing on. She went to Walker, not running. She'd learned over years of doing this specific thing, carrying information that the room isn't ready for. That running made it worse. Running made people defensive before they'd heard you. You needed to arrive like the information itself, certain, grounded, controlled. Walker was in the operations tent with Vega and the Major when she came in. She stood in the entrance until Walker looked up. Reynolds. Sir, I need 5 minutes. Something in her voice or her face made him dismiss Vega immediately. The Major started to follow, and Walker said quietly, Give us a moment, Major. And the Major left without argument. She closed the distance to the table and put her notebook down, open to the page where she'd written the numbers. The vehicle observation time. The logistics log entry. The 8-minute discrepancy. The road geometry. The access point. Walker read it. He read it twice. He looked up. Where did you get the logistics log? Vega. You went to Vega directly. Bennett did. I told him to keep the reason quiet until I'd spoken to you. Walker was very still. The kind of still that means a person is doing complex work inside that they're not showing on the surface. He looked at the notebook again. At the name Bennett had given her, which she'd written at the bottom of the page in her careful, precise handwriting. This is a serious allegation, he said. I know. Based on an 8-minute gap in a logistics log and a vehicle observation. Combined with the thermal suppression material. Combined with the advanced knowledge of our drone protocols. Combined with the convoy manifest access after the journalists were added. She kept her voice even. Individually, each of those is explainable. Together they form a pattern. Walker looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze without flinching, which she was aware required something from her that wasn't unlimited, but which she had enough of left. If I act on this, he said slowly, and I'm wrong, I know. The person named here has. I know who he is, sir. I know what it means. Do you understand what happens to you if I act on this and it turns out to be wrong? She understood completely. She'd understood it from the moment Bennett said the name. The career math was not in her favor under any scenario. Either. She was right, and she'd accused a senior NCO of feeding intelligence to the enemy, or she was wrong, and she'd done the same thing. There was no version of this where she came out without damage. Sir, she said, the convoy moves in 5 hours. If I'm right about this, there are people in this compound who still don't know the route is compromised beyond the ridge. If the leak is still active. Walker stood up. I was a deliberate man. She'd established that over 5 days of watching him move through decisions. But the speed with which he stood told her everything she needed to know about where his calculation had landed. Get Bennett, he said. Both of you stay out of this until I tell you otherwise. Do not discuss this with anyone. Not Vega, not Rusk, nobody. Yes, sir. Go. She went. The next 2 hours were the hardest she'd spent since arriving at the compound. Not because of what she'd done. She was at peace with what she'd done. The observation, the math, the decision to bring it forward. That part was finished, and it was right, and she knew it. The hard part was the waiting. She sat with her rifle in the east position, the one that had become familiar over 4 nights of watching, and she performed maintenance tasks. She didn't need to perform because her hands needed something to do while her mind ran the possibilities. She thought about the convoy. about the 43 people who were somewhere behind her, preparing unaware of the specific thing she'd set in motion. She thought about Bennett, who was somewhere in the compound right now, carrying the same weight with the particular stoicism she'd come to recognize as his natural register. She thought about the name on the page, and she thought about what it meant that someone with that level of access, that level of trust, had possibly, if she was right, if the pattern was real and not constructed, had spent the days before this mission, making sure it would end badly. Rusk came to find her at the 2-hour mark. She heard him coming, recognized his footfall didn't turn. He sat down beside her without speaking. This was new. The old Rusk occupied space loudly announced himself with volume. This one just sat. After a minute, Walker just detained Garrett. She kept her hands on the rifle. Full lockdown. Nobody's told us why, but Vega's face when he came out of the operations tent? He stopped. Garrett's been in this unit for 18 months. I've trusted him with... He stopped again. She turned to look at him. His face was doing something complicated. The particular devastation of a man whose certainty about something has just been removed, not gradually, but all at once. He looked older than he had 5 days ago. He looked like a person who had just discovered that the map he'd been using wasn't accurate and had to reconstruct everything from the ground up. "Was it you?" he said. "Who brought it to Walker?" She held his gaze. "You don't have to answer," he said. "I already know." She looked back at the ridge. The convoy still needs to move. Whatever happens with Garrett Root Copper still has to be cleared, and the convoy still has to roll. The weather window doesn't wait. "I know. And there may be other positions on the route that were fed the same information as the ridge. If Garrett was passing the route details..." "I understand what you're saying." His voice was flat. Not in the old way, the performance flat of a man who was pretending something wasn't affecting him. This was real flat. The flat of a man standing in the rubble of something he built his certainty on. "What do you need?" She looked at him. "From me," he said. "What do you need?" She thought about it. Specifically, concretely, in the way she thought about everything. "I need the best shooter you trust to take the secondary overwatch position on the southern ridge. I'm going to be on northern overwatch again. I need eyes on the section of Root Copper below the midpoint before the convoy moves through it." "That's Vega." "Then Vega. And what are you going to be doing?" She looked back at her rifle. "The same thing I've been doing since I got here," she said, "watching what everyone else missed." Rusk was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the compound, the way it had moved through every morning since she'd arrived, that low sustained note that felt like the mountain's own particular voice. "Reynolds," he said. She looked at him. "I owe you more than an apology." He said it like a man who has measured the distance between what he said and what was true and found it longer than he expected. "I'm not going to make it a speech, but I want you to know I understand that." She held his gaze. "Come back," she said. Same words he'd used that morning before she went to the ridge. She said them back now, not as an echo, but as a return, the same currency, different weight. He nodded once. They both went back to work. The convoy was 3 hours out. The mountain was quiet. And in the operations tent, Captain Walker was conducting an interrogation that would, within the next 90 minutes, produce a piece of information that none of them had planned for, a piece of information that would change the convoy route entirely, add a second compromised position to the threat map, and require a decision that Walker would ultimately have no choice but to hand to the one person in the compound who had earned it, the one person nobody had wanted there, the one person, it turned out, who had been the only one paying attention all along. The information Walker pulled from Garrett took 93 minutes. Ava knew it was 93 minutes because she counted. Not by watching a clock, she didn't have one in her line of sight, but by the rhythm of the compound around her. The way personnel moved and stopped moving, the quality of the silence that settled over the operations area when the interrogation we'd learned over years of waiting in positions where waiting was the whole job, that time had texture when something important was happening nearby. You could feel it in the way people breathed. Bennett came to her at the end of it. He didn't say anything immediately. He sat down across from her at the equipment bench, put both hands flat on the table, and looked at them for a moment, as though he was checking they were still his. Then, there's a second position. She'd expected it. She'd been expecting it since the Major said the word protocols in that careful way of his. One position was opportunity. Two positions was architecture. Where? Southern approach. The third contact zone from the original threat assessment, the one that was flagged as probable IED activity. He paused. It's not IED activity. It's another crew-served position, sighted on the convoy's last 2 kilometers before Firebase Keller. She worked through it. The geometry of it. The convoy entering Route Copper from the north, moving through the corridor, clearing the midpoint, descending toward the extraction point, and waiting for them at the end. At the moment when they were most committed, most exposed, least able to reverse a second gun. They were going to let the convoy enter the corridor, she said. Yes. Then close both ends. Yes. She looked at her rifle. The wood of the stock was worn at the grip point where her hand had found the same position thousands of times, leaving a smooth patch that felt different from the rest. Not from touch exactly, but from the particular way the material responded to sustained contact. She knew this rifle better than most people knew anything, and that knowledge was usually a quiet thing, a background hum. Right now, it was the only thing that felt certain. Walker, she said. What's he doing? Rewriting the convoy plan. He's been on the radio with command for the last 20 minutes. They're authorizing air support to clear the southern position before the convoy moves. Bennett looked at her directly. But the weather window moved up. There's a system coming in from the northwest. We have 4 hours now instead of 5. 4 hours. She ran at airstrike on the southern position. Confirmation of clear convoy assembly movement to Route Copper, full transit of the corridor. 4 hours was tight. It was achievable, but the margin for error had just become very thin. And Garrett, she said. Confined. The Major's people have him. Did he give them the southern position, or did they already know? He gave it. About 60 minutes in. Bennett's voice was flat in the way of a man reporting something he needs distance from. Walker said he started talking when they showed him the vehicle log, the 8-minute gap. She nodded. You knew, Bennett said. Not accusation, just the recognition of something he was still processing the shape of. From the first night, the vehicle. You logged it as supply movement, and you were already wrong-footing yourself into the right answer. I didn't know. I followed the line. Most people would have stopped following it the second the drone came back empty. She looked at him. Most people stop looking when they get an answer. I stop looking when I trust the answer. Bennett absorbed this. He had a way of sitting with things she'd said, not dismissing them, not immediately agreeing, just letting them settle before he decided what to do with them. She'd come to find it reassuring, in the same way you found certain things reassuring, that you couldn't entirely explain the consistency of a compass, the weight of a known tool. Walker wants you, he said. Operations tent. Now. The operations tent held more people than she'd seen in it at one time. Walker, the Major, Vega, a communications officer she recognized from the briefings, and Rusk standing at the far end of the map table, which told her the circle of knowledge had expanded and Walker had made specific choices about who was in it. The map on the table was covered in new markings. The original threat assessment overlaid with what Garrett had given them, and over that, in a different color, the adjusted convoy route Walker had been building. Walker looked at her when she came in. Close the entrance. She did. Here's where we are. He moved to the map without preamble. Air support will neutralize the southern position in approximately 90 minutes. Confirmation of clear will take another 30. That gives us 2.5 hours to move the convoy through Route Copper before the weather closes. He looked around the table. Standard convoy speed through that corridor is 60 to 70 minutes. We have margin. What we do not have margin for is a third position we haven't identified. He said it quietly, but the sentence landed like a weight being set down on a glass surface. The Major spoke. Garrett gave us 2 positions. He's been in contact with the enemy element for 6 weeks. He may not have known about additional assets. He may not, Walker said. Which means we plan for the possibility that he didn't. He looked at Ava. She understood before he said it. She understood from the geometry of the tent where everyone was standing, the angle of their attention, and from the particular way. Walker looked at her, which was the look of a man who has made a decision and is now in the process of implementing it. "I need Northern Overwatch for the full transit," he said. "Not the approach, the full transit from the moment the lead vehicle enters the corridor to the moment the last vehicle reaches Firebase Keller." He paused. "That's a moving Overwatch position. You're going to have to stay ahead of the convoy and relocate 3 times to maintain sightlines on the critical sections." "I know the corridor," she said. "The second relocation point is exposed. There's a gap in the rock cover between positions 2 and 3 that's approximately 40 meters wide. You'll be visible for the time it takes you to cross it." "How long?" 30 to 45 seconds, depending on pace. She did the math. If there was an unidentified third position, and she had no evidence, there was, but Walker was right to plan for it. Those 45 seconds were the window. Not during the relocation, during the crossing. The open ground between cover and cover was where you were most available. "Bennett stays with me," she said. "Already decided," Walker said. "And Vega on Southern Overwatch. Already in place." He looked at her steadily. "I need your read on the corridor. Not the threat assessment's read. Yours. You've been studying this terrain for 5 days. Tell me what the threat assessment didn't tell me." She moved to the map. For the next 12 minutes, she walked the table through it. Every observation she'd made, every pattern she'd identified, every location along Route Copper, that had given her a feeling, not a certainty, a feeling of wrongness when she'd looked at it through her scope from the observation posts. She marked 4 positions she considered worth watching. Not worth delaying, for worth watching. The Major was taking notes. Walker was listening in the way she'd learned to read over 5 days, full attention processing without interrupting, filing everything. When she finished, the tent was quiet for a moment. Rusk said from the end of the table, "The 4th position you marked, near the dry riverbed at kilometer 22. Why?" She looked at him. The question was genuine tactical interest, not challenge. Another thing that had changed. "The track marks," she said. 3 nights ago, when I was on the east observation post, I saw the vehicle on the valley road. But before the vehicle, I saw something on the dry riverbed. I didn't log because I wasn't sure of it. A pattern of marks in the silt that was inconsistent with natural erosion. Too regular. The kind of pattern you get when something heavy has been positioned and then removed." "Positioned and removed," Rusk said, "which means it was being test positioned, finding the right placement, and then moved back while they waited." "Waited for the convoy?" "Yes." Walker looked at the map, at the dry riverbed marker, at the relationship between that position and the convoy route. If there's a weapon at kilometer 22, it would be sighted on the convoy at its most vulnerable point, just after the midsection descent, when the vehicles are slowest and the terrain channels them into a narrow line. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Walker said, "Can you see kilometer 22 from Overwatch position 3? She studied the map. She worked the angles in her head, the elevations she'd memorized from 5 nights of observation, the lines of sight she'd traced so many times, they were part of her own geography now. "Yes," she said. "If I cross the gap and reach position 3 before the convoy reaches the midsection descent." "And if you don't make it across the gap in time," she looked at him, "then I don't have eyes on 22 when it matters. And the convoy is blind through its most exposed point." She said it clearly without softening it, because this was not a moment for softening. "That's the stakes." Walker was quiet. He looked at the map. He looked at her. He made the calculation that commanders make when they've run out of options that don't involve putting specific people in specific danger and have to decide which person and which danger. "The convoy moves in 2 hours, he said. "Get your kit ready." She had 40 minutes before she needed to move out to the northern approach. She spent the first 20 at the equipment bench. Not rushing, not slowing, moving at the pace that was exact, the pace where nothing was missed and nothing was wasted. Her rifle, her ammunition, her radio, her water. The small notebook that had been in her breast pocket for 5 days, and now held more information than any single document in the operations tent. Rusk came to find her at the 15-minute mark. I didn't make it a conversation. He put a spare radio battery on the table beside her kit, checked that she saw it, and started to leave. Rusk. He stopped. The journalists, she said. They were added to the manifest 48 hours ago. Did Garrett have access to the manifest at that point? Rusk turned back slowly. You think they were targeted specifically? The heavy machine gun on the northern ridge was positioned for the first 2 kilometers of the corridor. That's the entry point. That's where the lead vehicles are command vehicle media vehicle personnel carriers. She looked at him. If someone knew the journalists were in the convoy, you're saying it wasn't just about stopping the evacuation. I'm saying I don't know, but Walker should. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd come to recognize over the last few hours. The expression of a man who keeps finding that the person he dismissed has already thought further ahead than he has and is deciding what to do with that discovery. I'll tell him, he said. She nodded and went back to her kit. Bennett appeared at the 20-minute mark, fully loaded radio, already checked. He looked at her setup and didn't comment on it, which meant he approved of it, which she knew by now was the highest form of communication he used. You ready? He said. 2 minutes. He waited. She finished the final check, the precise sequential process she performed every time, the same order, the same steps, because precision was not a mood, and stood up. Bennett, she said. Yeah. The gap at position 2 to 3. When we cross it, you go first. He stared at her. Reynolds. You go first. 40 meters, move fast, don't stop. I'll cover the crossing from position 2 until you reach 3, then I follow. That leaves you exposed at position 2 while I'm crossing. Yes. And if there's a third position we haven't identified, then I'll have a better angle on it than you will, and I need to be the one behind the scope. I was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it, the tactical logic of it, which was sound, and the human resistance to it, which was also sound, and the calculation a person makes when both things are true, and one of them has to win. Okay, he said. Don't hesitate when I tell you to move. Don't look back. Okay. She picked up her rifle. Let's go. The convoy assembled behind them while they moved into position. She could feel it without seeing it. The compound behind them coming alive with the particular organized chaos of 43 people and multiple vehicles being arranged into a formation that would keep them alive through the next 70 minutes. She'd contributed to that arrangement in the operations tent, her 4 position markers on the map, her read of the corridor. Now the contributing was done, and the only thing left was the work itself. The northern approach to Route Copper was familiar territory. She'd spent enough hours looking at it from the observation post that moving through it felt like moving through a place she half lived in the rocks. The angle of the ground, the way the wind came from the west at this elevation and pushed slightly north. She moved with it rather than against it, which saved energy and reduced the sound her movement made. Bennett stayed with her at the correct distance, reading her pace, adjusting without being told. At position 1, she established quickly. Sight lines to the corridor entry point were clean. She keyed the radio. Convoy command, Overwatch Alpha. Position 1 established. Corridor entry is clear. Walker's voice. Copy that. Convoy is 30 minutes from entry. Weather holding. 30 minutes. She watched through her scope. The 4 positions she'd marked. The dry riverbed at kilometer 22, which she couldn't see from here, but could trace the approach to. The midsection terrain, which looked exactly as it had looked every time she'd studied it. Empty or apparently empty, which was a distinction she no longer took for granted. At 18 minutes, she saw something. Not at the marked positions. At a point she hadn't marked. A small flash high on the eastern cliff face. Duration less than a second. Could have been light on rock. Could have been a lens scope, glass binoculars, the glass face of a sighting system catching the angle of the morning sun. She stayed with it. Bennett, she said quietly. I see it. Eastern cliff bearing 045. Keep your eyes on it. 30 seconds. 45. Nothing. Then a second flash. Same location. Slightly different angle, which meant whatever was producing it had moved. Something had moved on the eastern cliff. Something that was watching the corridor. She keyed the radio. Convoy Command Overwatch Alpha. Possible fourth position, eastern cliff bearing 045 from my location. 2 light flashes not consistent with natural reflection. I'm marking it now. A pause. Then Walker, can you confirm? Negative on confirm. It's 2 flashes and a moving source. I can't see personnel from this distance. What's your read? She held the scope on the cliff face. Looked at the position. Looked at the angle to the corridor. Looked at the relationship between that cliff and the convoy's second kilometer of transit, where the vehicles would be in column moving at medium speed, committed to the route. My read, she said slowly, is that if I'm right about this, the convoy should not enter the corridor until I have eyes on that position from above. Reynolds, I have 43 people and a weather window. I know, sir. I'm telling you my read. A long pause. Longer than any previous pause. Long enough that she could feel the weight of the decision being made in the operations tent. The weather, the timeline, the convoy. 43 people, and a single flash of light on a cliff face that might be nothing. Walker said, "How long do you need?" 20 minutes. If I move to the secondary approach and gain elevation, you'll miss the transition to position 2. Yes. You won't have eyes on the corridor entry. Vega has eyes on the corridor entry from the southern position. Another pause. If you're wrong about the cliff. If I'm wrong, the convoy is 20 minutes late and I owe you an apology. She kept her voice level. If I'm right. Go, Walker said. She was already moving. The secondary approach to the eastern cliff was not a route she'd planned. She was running geometry in her head as she moved using the topography she'd memorized, making decisions about angle and elevation and time with the part of her mind that did this automatically, the part that had been trained and trained and trained until it operated below the level of conscious thought. Bennett was behind her, which she'd told him not to do, and she didn't waste breath telling him again. At 8 minutes, she gained enough elevation to see the cliff face properly. She stopped. Brought her scope up. Breathed. There was a position there. Not crew served. A sniper position. 2 personnel well concealed with a sightline that reached across the corridor to the approach the convoy would use for its second kilometer of transit. And they were looking at the convoy entry point, which meant they weren't looking up. She had 10 seconds before that changed. Convoy Command, she said, voice absolutely flat and controlled. I have a confirmed 4th position eastern cliff. Sniper element 2 personnel. They have direct sight on the convoy's second kilometer approach. She breathed once. I need you to hold the convoy at the entry point. Do not enter the corridor. Copy. Convoy is holding. Walker's voice had the quality of a man who has just received information that confirmed his worst contingency. What is your status? I have the position. Can you? He stopped. What are you saying, Reynolds? She looked through the scope. The 2 figures on the cliff. The angle. The distance. She worked at wind elevation, the particular quality of the morning light, the way the air moved at this altitude at this time of day. She had done this before. She had done it the one time she never talked about in conditions worse than these, and she had not missed. I'm saying I have the position, she said again. The radio was silent for 3 seconds. Reynolds. Walker's voice was careful, precise. What you're describing, that is your call. That is entirely your call. She understood what he was telling her. Not an order, not an authorization, a transfer of decision to the person with the information and the capability and the position. The kind of transfer that commanders make when they've run out of time and options and have to trust the person at the end of the line. She looked through the scope. She thought about the convoy. 43 people. She thought about the dry riverbed at kilometer 22, which still hadn't been confirmed, which meant the convoy couldn't move until both threats were neutralized. She thought about the weather window, how many minutes were left in it, how the math worked with this delay added. She thought about all of it in approximately 2 seconds. Then she stopped thinking and did what she'd been trained to do. The first shot changed the position. The second confirmed it. She didn't watch. She was already on the radio. Convoy Command, Eastern Cliff is clear. Two personnel no longer a threat. Convoy is clear to proceed. She paused. But hold until I'm in position 2. I still need eyes on kilometer 22. Copy that. Walker paused. Good shooting, Reynolds. She was already moving toward position 2. The gap between positions 2 and 3 was 40 meters of open ground. She reached position 2 with 11 minutes before the convoy's lead vehicle would hit the corridor entry. She established quickly, got eyes on the corridor, confirmed Vega's position on the southern ridge, and then looked at the gap. 40 meters. The light was wrong coming from behind her now, which meant anyone in an elevated position to her north would have a clear angle on a moving figure crossing that ground. She looked at kilometer 22 through her scope. The dry riverbed. The position she'd marked from an observation she almost didn't log. She couldn't see it clearly from here, the angle was wrong, the rock features in the way. She needed position 3. Bennett, she said. Ready. Move. He moved. She watched the northern elevations. Her scope tracked across every position that could hold a threat left to right. Methodical. The way she watched everything. Not looking for movement, but looking for the specific quality of stillness that meant something was there, and trying not to be seen. Bennett crossed the gap in 38 seconds. Clear, he said on the radio. She went. 40 meters of open ground, and she was in it, moving at the pace that was fast enough to reduce exposure time and controlled enough not to sacrifice her footing. And she was thinking about nothing except the ground in front of her, and the elevation to her left, and the sound of the wind, and the way her boots hit the rock surface with each step. 20 meters. Her radio crackled. She didn't stop. 30 meters. Bennett's voice. Reynolds movement kilometer 22. 10 meters. She reached position 3 and went straight to ground. Scope up. Kilometer 22. The dry riverbed. She found it in 2 seconds. There was a crew-served weapon there. 2-man crew. And they were not concealed. They had abandoned concealment and were in the process of bringing the weapon to bear on the corridor, which meant they knew the convoy was delayed, which meant they were adjusting, which meant time had just become a variable she no longer controlled. She keyed the radio. Convoy command confirmed position at kilometer 22. Crew served 2 personnel actively repositioning. I need air support on that position immediately. Air support is 12 minutes out, Walker said. The convoy cannot enter the corridor for 12 minutes. The weather window. Captain. She almost never used the rank with him directly. The word stopped him. If the convoy enters this corridor right now, the crew served at kilometer 22 fires into the midsection column before air support can neutralize it. I cannot take that shot from this position. The angle is wrong, and the range is at the edge of my capability in these conditions. She breathed once. 12 minutes. Hold the convoy for 12 minutes. A silence that lasted 3 full seconds, which in radio silence was an eternity. Convoy is holding, Walker said. She kept her scope on kilometer 22. She watched the 2-man crew. They were moving with purpose, repositioning the weapon by increments, adjusting their sight line. They were professionals, they were patient, and they were going to be ready to fire before the 12 minutes were up. Bennett, she said. Yeah. Talk to me. Keep talking. He understood immediately. Convoy is 43 personnel, 3 journalists. 2 of them have been in theater before. One of the NGO workers is a doctor. The medical team lead is named Ose. She asked good questions in the briefing. She kept her scope on the position. Her breathing was steady. Her hands were steady. The world outside the scope was abstract, and the world inside it was very specific and very real. Keep going, she said. Rusk, Bennett said. He's been in the unit 3 years. Before that Ranger battalion. He has a daughter. Showed me a picture once. She's 7. Her name is Elena. She watched the crew at kilometer 22. She calculated. Reconfirmed the range, the wind, the angle. Came to the same conclusion she'd come to the first time. The shot was possible. It was not reliable. And not reliable meant not acceptable. 8 minutes, she said. The 43 people on that convoy, Bennett said, have a combined 112 years of service between the military personnel alone. Ose told me that. She calculated it during the last briefing. She said she calculated it because she wanted to remember it. She said, "Contact," Ava said. Bennett went silent. The crew at kilometer 22 had locked the weapon onto the corridor. She could see it in the way the barrel was no longer moving. The incremental adjustments had stopped, and the stillness of a positioned weapon was different from every other kind of stillness. They were ready. "Convoy command," she said. "Kilometer 22 is fully positioned and locked on the corridor. Air support ETA. 7 minutes. 7 minutes." She looked at the corridor. Empty. The convoy was holding at entry. 43 people in vehicles' engines, running, waiting. 7 minutes was both everything and nothing depending on what happened in them. She looked back at kilometer 22. And then she saw something that changed the calculation entirely. The second crew member was not at the weapon. He had moved away from the position 5 meters, then 8, and he was looking up. Not at the corridor. Not at the convoy entry point. He was looking at the cliff. The eastern cliff. Where she had taken the 2 shots 22 minutes ago. Howe was looking at the eastern cliff, and he was talking on a radio, and she understood with the sudden and complete clarity of a person who has just had a pattern resolve in front of them that the 4 enemy positions were coordinated. They had communication between them. And the eastern cliff not answering meant that this crew knew something had changed. They were adapting. And adapting meant they might move the weapon. Relocate it before air support arrived. Find a new position that she hadn't marked, hadn't identified, hadn't told Walker about because she didn't know about it. She keyed the radio. "Convoy command, the crew at kilometer 22 is communicating with their command element. They may attempt to reposition before air support arrives. If they move that weapon..." "I understand," Walker said. "What do you need?" She looked through the scope. She ran the calculation one more time. Range, wind, angle. The variables that had said not reliable 8 minutes ago. 8 minutes ago the crew had been moving. Now they were communicating, which meant one of them was stationary. Stationary changed one of the variables. Not reliable had moved to possible. She breathed once. Fully. Let it out. "I need the convoy to not enter the corridor for 90 more seconds," she said. "Reynolds." "90 seconds, Captain." A pause. "You have it," Walker said. She settled the scope. She thought about nothing. She felt everything, the cold of the ground beneath her, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the particular quality of her. At this altitude, the way the wind was moving against her left cheek. At 3 knots, the correction she needed to make for it. The specific calculation of a shot she had never made at this range from this angle, with this much riding on it. She thought about the 43 people waiting at the entry point. She thought about Osei counting 112 years. She thought about Elena, who was 7, and whose father was in a vehicle below her right now. And then she stopped thinking, because thinking was not what this moment needed. She fired. At kilometer 22, the weapon stopped being a threat. She keyed the radio immediately. "Convoy command, kilometer 22 is clear. Convoy is clear to proceed. Move now before conditions change." There was a half-second pause that felt like a held breath. Then Walker's voice, stripped of everything, except the communication itself. "Convoy is moving. Well done, Reynolds." She kept her scope on the corridor. She watched the lead vehicle enter Route Copper. She watched the second vehicle follow. The third. She tracked them through the first kilometer through the section that the Northern Ridge gun had been sighted on before Vega's team cleared it that morning. She tracked them through the second kilometer past the cliff face where the sniper position had been. She tracked them toward the midsection, the descent, the area around kilometer 22, where the ground was now clear. One by one, the vehicles moved through the corridor. She didn't move. She didn't lower her scope. She watched every meter. Beside her, Bennett was doing the same, his binoculars up, his breathing steady, not speaking, because this was not a moment for speaking. The last vehicle cleared the midsection at kilometer 22 at 13:47. The weather came in at 13:52. The corridor closed behind the convoy, like a door swinging shut, the clouds dropping fast and hard and covering the mountain in the particular way of mountain weather, not gradual, but sudden total. 5 minutes. If any single thing had taken 5 minutes longer. The interrogation, the decision in the operations tent, the second at position 2, when she'd almost hesitated before telling Bennett to move. The 90 seconds she'd asked Walker for the convoy would still have been in the corridor when the weather closed. She lowered her scope. She sat back against the rock and looked at the sky, which was now gray and moving fast, and she let herself feel the thing she'd been holding at a distance for the last 4 hours. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but the particular sensation of a task completed at the edge of what was possible, the feeling of a margin held to zero. Bennett lowered his binoculars and said nothing for a moment. Then, "They're clear." "Yes." "All 43?" "Yes." He looked at the sky. "The shot at kilometer 22, he said. "From this position, at that range." "Don't," she said. "I'm not calculating the odds. I'm just—" He stopped. "How?" She looked at her rifle. At the worn patch on the stock where her hand had always found its place. At the particular weight and balance of a tool she had spent years learning through repetition and discipline, and one specific night she didn't talk about. "Because I had to," she said. It was the only answer that was true. Bennett sat beside her in the closing weather with that answer between them, and neither of them spoke again for a long time, because some things don't need anything added to them. Below them, Route Copper was empty. The corridor had closed. Somewhere ahead of the weather, 43 people were moving toward Firebase Keller, and a journey home that an hour ago had been balanced on the narrowest possible edge, and the person who had held that edge was sitting on a mountain with her back against a rock. Not celebrating, not performing, not waiting to be recognized, just present, just quiet, just the person who had done the work because the work needed doing. Which was, she had always believed, exactly what a soldier was for. The weather held for 6 hours. In that time, the convoy reached Firebase Keller, unloaded 43 personnel without a single casualty, and the aerial extraction window opened exactly 4 minutes before it would have closed permanently. The Dr. Corporal Diana O., the one who had counted 112 years of combined service and wanted to remember. It was the last person to board the extraction aircraft. She stopped at the top of the ramp and looked back at the mountain and held that look for a moment. The way people hold looks at things they know they are never going to see again. Nobody who was there forgot that image. The woman at the top of the ramp, the mountain behind her, the weather coming in like a curtain being drawn across something finished. Ava wasn't there to see it. She and Bennett were still on the mountain when the extraction happened, waiting out the weather in a position that had become too exposed to move from safely. They came down when the system passed 4 hours later into a compound that had changed in the specific way that compounds change after something has happened inside them. Quieter, reorganized, carrying the weight of an event that everyone present was still in the process of understanding. Walker met them at the gate. He looked at both of them, at Ava first, then Bennett, then back at Ava, and what was in his face was not the face of a commander assessing returned personnel. It was the face of a man who had something to say and was deciding how to say it correctly. He said, "The journalists filed their report from Keller. The story's already moving." Ava looked at him. "They know about the 4 positions. They know about the interrogation. They know about the convoy delay and the weather window." He paused. "They don't have your name yet. Command is deciding how to handle that." "I'm not interested in the story," she said. "I know you're not." He held her gaze. "That's part of why I'm telling you." She and Bennett walked through the gate. The compound had that quality of aftermath, the specific texture of a place where the adrenaline has metabolized, and what's left is the reality of what happened, sitting in every corner, waiting to be dealt with. Rusk was at the equipment bay. He saw them come in, and he crossed the compound directly, which was not his style. Rusk was a man who moved at angles, who approached things indirectly as a matter of personality. Walking straight at something meant it had moved past the point where indirection was available. He stopped in front of Ava. He put out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm and brief, and said more than he was going to say out loud, which she understood and accepted. "Garrett," he said. "I know. I've been trying to work out when it started. When he stopped. Started again. We ate dinner together every night for 18 months. I told him things. He was quiet for a moment, and what was in his silence was the specific grief of a betrayal that reaches back and contaminates memory, that makes you re-examine every ordinary moment for the thing you should have seen. I didn't know. Nobody knew, she said. You figured it out. I followed a line. The line was there for anyone to follow. But nobody else was looking. He said it without the old edge, not as an accusation toward himself or a compliment to her, just as a fact he was still learning to carry. I spent 4 days convinced you were the problem, and the whole time, he looked at the ground. The whole time the actual problem was sitting at the same table as me, eating the same food, and I never, Rusk. She waited until he looked at her. What you missed about Garrett, that's a different thing from what you missed about me. Don't confuse them. He looked at her. You missed Garrett because he was deliberately hiding. People who are hiding are hard to find. She paused. You missed me because you decided what I was before you looked. Those two things are not the same mistake. He was quiet for a long time. Then, no, they're not. He nodded once and walked away, and in the particular way he walked, not the broad territorial stride of the first 4 days, but something more contained, more considered. She could see that something in him had genuinely shifted. Not a performance, not a social correction. An actual change, the kind that happens when a person has been wrong about something important enough that they can't go back to what they were. She watched him go and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, something quieter. The recognition that the ground had moved under this man, and he was trying to find his footing on new terrain, and that was neither simple nor small. The debrief took 3 hours. The major ran it with Walker present and 2 additional intelligence officers who had arrived from command during the weather hold. Ava gave her account in the order it had happened, which was also the order in which her notebook had recorded it. The first night's observations, the pattern development, the vehicle, the road geometry, the confrontation of the drone result, the 4-night accumulation, the forward position. Garrett, the 4 enemy positions, each shot, each decision, the margin at the end. She spoke without embellishment and without understatement. She gave them the facts and let the facts carry their own weight, which was considerable. The major asked one question that surprised her. At the point in the account where she described the interrogation of Garrett, not her interrogation. Walker's, which she hadn't been present for, but whose results had reached her through Bennett. The major looked up from his notes and said, "When did you first suspect it was someone inside?" She thought about it precisely. "When you said the word protocols," she said. "In the operations tent after the QRF secured the ridge. You said the enemy had advance information about our drone protocols. That was specific. Drone protocols are not battlefield intelligence. They're procedural intelligence. The kind that comes from someone who knows how we operate, not just where we are." The major looked at her for a moment. "You didn't say anything at the time. I didn't have the vehicle log yet. But you were already working the problem." "I'm always working the problem." He wrote something. She didn't know what. She didn't ask. Walker spoke for the first time in an hour. "The shot at kilometer 22, he said. "The range, the angle, the conditions. Walk me through the decision." She looked at him. "I'd already determined the shot was not reliable when the crew was moving. When the second crew member moved away from the weapon and became stationary, that changed one variable. Stationary target at that range with those wind conditions and that elevation is within reliable parameters." "Within reliable parameters," Walker repeated. "What's the margin?" "At that range and those conditions, accounting for wind correction, the margin is approximately 6 inches at the point of impact." 6 inches. Yes. "And the consequence of being outside that margin?" "The shot misses. The crew has a warning. They reposition. You lose the air support window because they're no longer at a fixed location." She held his gaze. "I was not outside the margin." "No," Walker said. "You weren't." He looked at his hands for a moment, the way he'd looked at the ceiling on the night she'd first brought him the observation notes. "I want you to know something," he said. "When you called for the 90 seconds, the last 90 seconds before that shot, I had 43 people in vehicles at the corridor entry with a weather window that was already inside its final margin. I had command on the radio asking me why the convoy was still holding. He paused. I gave you the 90 seconds because by that point, I had 5 days of evidence that when you asked for something, you had a reason for it that I might not fully see yet. She was quiet. That's not nothing, he said. I want you to understand that. The trust has to be built. You built it, and it mattered. She held that. Not the compliment of it, she was not particularly moved by compliments, but the structure of what he was saying. That the 5 days had accumulated into something. That the work she'd done, the observations she'd logged, the pattern she'd followed, even when nobody wanted to follow it with her, had eventually become a currency that could be spent in the moment when it mattered most. Thank you, sir, she said. Don't thank me. I held the convoy twice. The first time cost me with Briggs. The second time cost me more. He almost smiled. Worth it both times. Garrett was moved to a secure facility before the debrief ended. Ava never saw him after the detention, which she was aware of without feeling one way or another about it. He would go through a process, military justice intelligence review, the long institutional machinery of accountability. That was not her part of the work. Her part was finished. What she hadn't expected was Vega. He found her that evening in the East Observation Post, the one she'd spent 4 nights in, the one that had started all of this. She was sitting there without her scope, without her rifle, just sitting in the dark, the way she sometimes sat at the end of a day when she needed the night to be quiet around her for a while. He came and sat beside her without asking, which was becoming a pattern among the men in this compound, and which she'd stopped being surprised by. Kunar, she said. He looked at her. The Kunar operation you told Bennett about. The thermal suppression material. He came to me with it the same day I was already working the vehicle problem. 2 separate lines reaching the same point. She looked at the valley dark, now the mountain absorbing what light was left. You had that information for how long? Vega was quiet for a moment. 3 years. And you didn't flag it. It was an anomaly from a completed operation. I filed a report at the time. Nothing came of it. He paused. When Bennett asked me about it, I thought if there's someone actually looking at the current situation through that lens, then the information has somewhere to go. You chose Bennett because you didn't know whose side to put it on directly. I chose Bennett because he was asking the right question. He looked at her. And I chose him because I'd been watching you for 4 days and I didn't know yet what you were. But I knew you were something. She considered this. What changed your mind? The second night at the observation post. I saw you come in at 04:15. I was on watch. I watched you sit down and write for 45 minutes before you went to Walker. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in the work a long time. Most people who are trying to prove something talk about what they saw. You wrote it down first. You organized it before you moved it forward. That's not a virtue, she said. That's just method. Most people don't have method when they're under pressure. She thought about that. About the difference between urgency and precision. The way urgency wanted to shout, and precision wanted to document, and how hard it was to maintain the second when the first was pressing at you from every direction. Vega, she said. Yeah. The logistics authorization log, the run that Garrett authorized 3 nights ago. Your name was on the review sign-off. He went very still. You didn't catch the 8-minute discrepancy, she said. Not accusation, just the fact stated clearly. No. Why? He was quiet for a longer moment than she expected. Because I trusted the authorization, he said finally. Garrett had authorization clearance. The vehicle was logged correctly on the return entry. I reviewed the numbers, not the timing. The timing was the only place the information was. I know. His voice was flat with something she recognized, the specific flatness of a person who has looked at a failure and decided not to flinch from it. I missed it. I've been doing this long enough that I thought I knew what to look for, and I missed it. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the valley, and his profile in the dark had the quality of a man who is in the process of revising something fundamental about how he understands his own reliability. You didn't miss Kunar, she said. He looked at her. You filed the report 3 years ago. Nobody acted on it, but you logged it. You kept the information alive long enough for Bennett to find it and bring it here. She paused. The 8-minute gap in the logistics log is on Garrett. He built it to be missed. The thermal suppression technique at Kunar, that's on the command structure that received your report and didn't move it forward. She held his gaze. The only thing in this operation that you could have done differently and didn't is also the thing that was most specifically designed to be invisible. Vega looked at her for a long moment. You're easier to work with than I expected, he said. I'm easy to work with when people are being honest, she said. I'm difficult when they're not. He almost laughed. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was the sound that comes close to a laugh when the person making it is tired enough that the distance between them has shortened. I'll remember that, he said. He stood up, stood for a moment with his hands in his pockets looking at the valley. Reynolds, he said. Yeah. What you did today, the 4 positions, the shots, the 90 seconds, he stopped. I've been doing this for 16 years. I've worked with good people. I've worked with great people. He looked at her. What you did today was in a category I don't have a word for yet. She didn't answer. I'm going to find one, he said. I'll let you know. He walked back toward the compound, and she listened to his footsteps until they faded, and then the night was quiet again, and she sat in it for a long time. The morning brought Colonel Briggs. He arrived by helicopter at 0700, which told Ava that whatever he had to say to Walker was not a conversation he wanted to have over the radio. She was at the equipment bench performing the maintenance she hadn't been able to do the previous day when the helicopter came in, and she watched it land with the particular attention she gave everything. Not anxious, not anticipatory, just present. She expected to be summoned. She was not summoned. For 2 hours, Briggs was in the operations tent with Walker. Ava could not hear what was said. She could read the quality of the compound around her, the way personnel moved, the way conversations stopped and started, the particular alertness of people who knew something was being decided about their world without them in the room. At 0910, Walker came to find her. He stood at the equipment bench and looked at her for a moment, and in that moment she had the experience of reading his face with the accumulated knowledge of 6 days, the specific language of his expressions, the way he held his jaw when something was settled versus when it was still in motion. This was settled. Command wants a full review of the intelligence assessment process, he said. Starting with the drone protocols, how enemy units are accessing information about them, how we're authorizing the suppression material entering theater. She nodded. They're also reviewing the original threat assessment methodology for this operation, how the ridge at kilometer 17 wasn't flagged. The southern approach, she said. If the assessment team was only using southern observation angles, that's part of what they're looking at. He paused. Your observation methodology, the 4-night sequence, the documentation process. Briggs wants it written up as a formal procedure. She looked at him. Your process, he said. The way you build a threat picture. Data before conclusion. Pattern before report. Witness confirmation before escalation. He wants it formalized and distributed as a supplemental observation protocol for forward teams. The quiet that settled between them had a specific quality, not of surprise exactly, but of something arriving that she hadn't let herself expect. That's not necessary, she said. I know you think that. Briggs disagrees. Walker held her gaze. For what it's worth, so do I. She looked at her rifle on the bench. At the notebook beside it, worn at the corners now, every page of the relevant section filled with her precise handwriting. It's not a special methodology, she said. It's just observation, patience, following the line wherever it goes without deciding in advance where it ends. I know, Walker said. That's why it needs to be written down, because apparently it's not obvious. She absorbed this. There's something else, he said. She looked up. Briggs asked me directly who identified the internal compromise. I told him. He wants to speak with you before he leaves. When? Now. Briggs was a compact man in his early 50s who carried himself with the particular economy of movement that came from decades of operating in environments where every gesture communicated something. He shook her hand when she came into the tent, which was not what she expected, and he looked at her the way very few people had looked at her in her professional life, not assessing, not categorizing, but simply attending the way you attend to something you want to understand. He said, "Walk me through the vehicle." She did. From the first observation, the running lights, the road, the stop at the unmarked point, the 4 minutes through the road, geometry calculation, the access point connection, the logistics log discrepancy, the 8-minute gap. She gave it to him in the same order she'd given it to Walker, with the same precision, without acceleration. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The night you logged the vehicle, that was night 1. "Yes, sir." "Before you had the signal observations from nights 2 and 3. "Yes." "So when you logged it, you didn't know yet what you were looking at." "No, I logged it because it was anomalous. I didn't know why until later." He nodded slowly. "Most people don't log things they don't know why they're logging. If you only log things you already understand," she said, "you lose the data that would have helped you understand sooner." He looked at her steadily. "How long have you been operating on that principle?" She thought about it. "Since I understood that the thing that gets you killed is usually the thing you decided wasn't worth writing down." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The internal compromise. When you brought it to Walker, you understood what it would cost you if you were wrong." "Yes, sir." "And if you were right?" "Yes, sir." "You brought it anyway." "The convoy was moving in 5 hours," she said. "The cost of being wrong about Garrett was something I'd deal with later. The cost of being right and not bringing it was 43 people." Briggs looked at her for a long time. The look of a man adding something up and arriving at a number he respects. "Reynolds," he said, "I'm going to ask you something directly, and I want a direct answer." "Yes, sir." "Do you want to stay in the field, or do you want to teach?" The question landed in a place she hadn't known was available. She'd thought about her future not often, not with the kind of sustained attention she gave missions, but enough to know the broad shape of what she wanted. The field, the work, the specific combination of patience and precision and consequence that she did better than almost anything else. But Briggs wasn't asking about her preference as if it were academic. He was asking about it as if he already knew something she didn't. "Both," she said. He nodded, as if this was the answer he expected. "Good," he said, "because I'm recommending a dual assignment. You continue field rotations. You also consult on the observation protocol development and sit on the assessment review panel." He paused. "You won't be popular with the people whose methodology you're reviewing. I'm aware. Some of them outrank you considerably." "I'm aware of that too." Something moved across his face that was close enough to a smile to count. "The 4 positions," he said. "When you were on the mountain, was there a moment when you thought it wasn't going to come together?" She thought about it honestly. "The gap between positions 2 and 3, she said. "Those 40 meters. I knew if there was a third position we hadn't identified, that was when it would find me. And I knew that if it did, I'd be 50 meters from the scope I needed to deal with kilometer 22. "What did you do with that?" "I crossed the gap." He looked at her. "That's it." "Yes, sir. The alternative was to not cross it. And not crossing it meant the convoy entered the corridor without eyes on the most dangerous section." She paused. The decision wasn't complicated. The ground was. Howe was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular tone of a man closing a conversation that has given him what he came for. "6 days ago, you walked into this compound with a rifle case and a notebook and a record that nobody in this command structure had bothered to read carefully." She said nothing. "In 6 days, you identified 4 enemy positions, an internal compromise, a systemic failure in our aerial surveillance methodology, and a gap in our forward observation protocols that has almost certainly affected other operations we don't know about yet." He let that sit. "And you did it while half the people around you were actively working against your ability to function." "They weren't working against me," she said. "They just weren't working with me yet." He studied her. That's a generous read. It's an accurate one. Rusk didn't try to stop me. He tried to discount me, which is different. He came around. He came around because you were right. He came around because he's an honest man. Being right gave him something honest to respond to. She paused. There's a distinction. Briggs stood up. He put out his hand again, and she shook it again, and this time she understood the gesture differently. Not as a commander's formal acknowledgement, but as one professional's recognition of another. The protocol, all right up, he said. I need it in 30 days. Yes, sir. And Reynolds. He stopped at the tent entrance. The people on that convoy, say the journalists, the 43. They're going to go home and live their lives, and most of them are never going to know specifically what happened on this mountain. He looked at her. I want you to know that I know. He left. She stood in the empty tent for a moment, with the particular quality of silence that follows a significant thing being said, and she let herself feel the weight of it. Not the praise of it, which she wasn't sure how to hold, but the truth of it. 43 people going home. 43 people who would wake up tomorrow and drink coffee and argue with their families and look at mountains from a distance and have no specific reason to know that the margin between that ordinary life and a different outcome had at one precise moment on a mountain corridor been 90 seconds and 6 inches. She picked up her notebook and walked out. Rusk was waiting outside. He'd been sitting on a crate near the tent entrance, and when she came out, he stood up without explaining why he was there, which she understood meant he'd known Briggs was inside and had waited anyway. Well, he said. Dual assignment. Field and review panel. He nodded. That's right. You knew. Walker told me this morning. He stopped. He wanted someone to be here when you came out. In case. She looked at him. In case of what? He shifted his weight. In case you needed to tell someone before you had to carry it alone. He said it in the matter-of-fact way of a man who has decided to be direct about something, because the alternative is saying nothing. And saying nothing no longer feels like an option. Good news or bad, it doesn't matter. You've been carrying everything alone since you got here and... He stopped again. It seemed like the thing to do. She looked at him for a long moment. It's good news, she said. He let out a breath. Then, good. They stood for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have reached the other side of something together and are still adjusting to the new ground. Rusk, she said. Yeah. Your daughter, Elena. He looked at her. Bennett told me about her. On the mountain while we were waiting. He was talking to keep me grounded. She paused. She's lucky to have someone who's an honest man. Rusk looked at her with an expression she didn't have a category for something between grief and gratitude, and the specific complexity of a person who has been seen accurately by someone they underestimated and is learning what that costs and what it gives at the same time. Thank you, he said. She nodded and walked toward the equipment bay. Her last night in the compound, she went back to the East Observation Post. Not to watch. Just to sit in the place where it had started the first night, the signal light, the vehicle, the 4 minutes on the road. The place where she'd sat with a scope and a notebook, and the specific patience of a person who has learned that the truth doesn't announce itself. It waits. And you have to be willing to wait with it. Bennett found her there. She'd started expecting that. He sat down beside her, and they were quiet together for a while. The way people are quiet together when they've been through something that language hasn't caught up to yet. Then he said, What's next for you? 30 days to write the observation protocol, then field assignment, then review panel rotation. She paused. You? Walker put me in for a team leader recommendation. Probably another compound somewhere. Another mission that looks straightforward until someone notices something. Make sure that someone has a notebook, she said. I'm going to carry one from now on. He said it seriously, not as a joke, not as a tribute, as a practical decision made by a practical person. And I'm going to log things I don't understand yet. Good. Because of you. Because of what happened here, she corrected. I was the occasion. The lesson was in the event. He shook his head slowly. You know you have a real gift for refusing credit. I have a real gift for accuracy. Same thing in your case. She looked at the valley, at the dark shape of the ridge at kilometer 17, which was now just a ridge, just a geographic feature cleared and catalogued and stripped of the threat it had been carrying for weeks before anyone knew to look for it. It looked ordinary. That was the thing about threats that had been neutralized. They reverted to ordinary, and you had to remember what they had been. Bennett, she said. Yeah. When you talked to me on the mountain, when you kept me grounded, you talked about Osei counting the years. Yes. Why that specifically? He thought about it. Because she counted it, because she wanted to remember it. Because she thought it mattered that the years added up to something that they were worth adding. He paused. I thought if you were thinking about that number, you'd stay connected to what you were doing and why. Not the tactical why, the actual why. She was quiet. Did it work? He said. Yes. Good. She looked at the valley for a while longer. She thought about 112 years. She thought about what years add up to when they're spent in service, the accumulation of experience and consequence, and the specific knowledge that comes from being the person who shows up and does the work when the work is necessary, regardless of what it costs, regardless of who's watching or not watching. She thought about the first morning. Hale's voice not yet looking up from the map. Get that rifle case off my table. The way the room had felt the wall of it, the consolidated weight of people who had already decided. The way she'd put her hands at her sides and said what she said and refused to be smaller than the moment required. She thought about Rusk's laugh. The sound of it broad and certain, the laugh of a man who had no doubt about what he was seeing. A girl with a rifle. What is this, a shooting competition? She thought about all of it. The laughter, the nickname, the drone that came back empty, the 8-minute gap in a logistics log, the 40 meters of open ground between positions 2 and 3, the 90 seconds, the 6-inch margin at kilometer 22. She thought about 43 people on an aircraft going home, and she thought this is what the work is. Not the recognition of it, not the formal write-up or the review panel or the dual assignment or even the handshake from a colonel who made the effort to tell her he knew. The work is the first night alone in the dark, watching something nobody else is watching, writing down what you see before. You know why you're writing it, following the line wherever it goes, trusting the data over the comfort of being believed, holding your position when everything around you is telling you the position doesn't exist. The work is being willing to be wrong and doing it anyway, because the alternative is not looking, and not looking is not something she had ever been capable of. She heard Rusk's laugh again in the memory of it, and this time what she felt was not the sting of it, but something closer to understanding. He had laughed because she was unexpected, because the picture she presented didn't match the picture in his head. Because certainty is comfortable, and she had arrived as a disruption of his certainty, and disruption is easier to laugh at than to sit with. He'd sat with it. He'd come around, not because she'd proven him wrong, because she'd given him something honest to look at, and he was underneath everything an honest man. She believed that about people, that most of them, given something true to respond to, would eventually respond truthfully. It took longer for some than others. It cost more for some than others. But the capacity was there in most people if you were willing to wait for it. She had been willing to wait. She left the compound at 0600 the next morning. Bennett walked her to the gate. They shook hands, and in the handshake was the entire compressed weight of 6 days, the observation post, the ridge, the 40 meters, the 90 seconds, all of it held in the grip and then released. Write the notebook, she said. Already started, he said. She walked through the gate. Vega was at the vehicle. He opened the door and held it, a small courtesy offered directly without theater. She got in. Rusk was standing at the perimeter wall. He raised a hand. She raised one back. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. The vehicle moved. She looked forward. Behind her, the compound receded. The mountain remained the way mountains remain, indifferent, enormous, carrying the weather and the history, equally asking nothing from the people who moved across its face and left their marks and disappeared. The ridge at kilometer 17 was just a ridge. The dry riverbed at kilometer 22 was just a riverbed. The East Observation Post was just a post. And the girl with the rifle, the girl they had laughed at, discounted, named a ghost hunter, asked to move her rifle case off the table, was not a girl at all. She was a soldier. She had always been a soldier. She had walked into a compound where no one believed that, and she had done her job with such precision and such patience and such total disregard for the comfort of being liked that one by one. The people around her had been left with no honest choice except to see her clearly. She had not changed them. She had simply refused to be invisible long enough for them to run out of reasons to look away. And when the moment came, the real moment, the one that could not be survived with assumptions and comfortable certainty, she had been exactly who she had always been. The person who noticed, the person who logged it, the person who followed the line, the person who waited until she trusted the answer, the person who took the shot. All 43 people on that convoy went home, and not one of them knew by exactly how much, or by exactly whom, or at exactly what cost. And Ava Reynolds, riding in a vehicle toward the next thing, with her worn rifle case on the seat beside her, and her notebook in her breast pocket, did not need them to know. She knew. And in this work, in this life, in this specific and demanding and necessary occupation, she had chosen, and would choose again, without hesitation, that was always enough.